If you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where fashion sits, putting on the Ritz. Different types who wear a day coat, pants with...
So Phil, how did you come to use the alias Ted Tappet?
When I first raced, I thought it would be wise that my parents shouldn't be aware that I was racing, because I'm sure they would think it was more dangerous than it was, and it would worry them. However, the alias didn't last. The parents found out within 2 weeks. Apparently someone said to my mother, "Have you been watching Phil over at Freeport?" And of course that was the end of my parents knowing about racing.
How old were you then?
I was 21.
And what year was that?
That was 1938.
And how did you happen to just get into racing?
I went over there with my helmet and goggles, which I'd had for a long time, in anticipation of getting a ride.
Over to?
Never won, but it looked like it was fun.
Over to where?
Over to Freeport track.
Oh, okay.
It was a dirt track at that time. And a fellow by the name of Gus Ermish had a decent little car that finished about in the middle of the pack as a rule. And I went up to him after he fired his driver because the driver hadn't qualified in the heat for the semifinal. And that put the car in the consolation, and you have to finish first or second in the consolation to get into the main, and then you're privileged to start last in the main. So I said to Ermish, "I'm pretty sure I can get your car into the main if you'll give me a chance. I just came in from California where I've been racing, and I'd like an opportunity to get started here in the East." And apparently he bought my story, and I got in the car and started 8th in the consolation and won it.
And that was really your first race?
And that was my very first race. And then I started 14th in the main and finished 6th. And a couple of days later, I told Ermish the truth that that was my first race, and I was from Manhattans after that, and we did rather well in the second season in a new car, a dryer cycle type. We had 11 firsts and 11 seconds. And then I left Gus Ermish to drive my own car that I had built. This car is an Austin Healey, a Silverstone Healey model that was purchased by Briggs Cunningham, and a Cadillac engine was installed, and a DD on rear end built by Bill Frick was also installed. The car was to be a test for Cunninghams to be built. It was about the size and weight of the Cunningham we planned to build, and this gave us a quick opportunity to see how the car would perform against the competition of that day. In its first race at Watkins Glenn, it won the Seneca Cup with Walters driving, and it finished second in the Grand Prix with Cunningham driving. We considered that we were on the right track and that we should proceed with the building of the Cunninghams, which would be similar from a performance standpoint, but quite different looking.
What year was that?
That was in 1950, the summer of 1950. The conversion was made, and it ran at Watkins Glen in 1950.
Is there anybody else in the picture you recognize? Is there anybody in the picture you know?
Yeah, the person to the left is Bill Frick, I don't know the man in the middle. The man to the right is Walt Hanscom, and that was taken when he was still driving MGs at the beginning of his career. This is the first Cunningham that was built completely as a Cunningham. It has a Cadillac engine and a Didion rear end, Cadillac transmission, and the chassis was completely built by the Cunningham people as well as the body. The front suspension was made up of various American car parts, mostly Ford. The wheels are what they call Baroni Italian wire wheels. The car was designed in the summer of 1950 by Walters. He did the designing in the attic of his parents' home in Manhasset. He was living with his parents at the time. When the design was completed, Briggs and a friend of his who was an engineer with Rolls came to the attic to see what I had. They looked at it for about an hour and a half and discussed it a lot, and then left and said they'd be in touch. The following day, Briggs called me and he said, "I accept the design as is with no changes. I like it very much. I'm very interested in when we can start building it and when you think we can have it finished." That was his prime interest at that time. He also said, "I'm buying the Ted Tappet Motors Company and merging it into the B.S. Cunningham Company and moving it to Florida where we will build these cars. We're going to operate in Florida because a good portion of the year, particularly the winter, the weather is better there for road testing, and it's easier to get help amongst the newly retired craftsmen that are looking for a little activity." This car was started to be built before we left for Florida, and a number of the assemblies were completed at Ted Tappet and Freeport before we moved. The car was on its first road test as a completed vehicle in March of 1950. The car's performance was up to our expectations and then some. Briggs was very pleased. I'll now show you some other pictures taken from different angles. This is the same car taken from the rear quarter, and now I'll give you a picture of the car from the very front. A picture of the dashboard area. And this picture primarily shows the seats, which were all handmade at the Cunningham Company in Florida. This picture shows the C1 with the top up on the left, and the other three cars are the C2s, which means that they were basically the same car as the C1, except they were prepared for LeMans with the American striping arrangement, and the engine was Chrysler Hemi instead of the Cadillac. The people in the background represent the employees of the B.S. Cunningham Company that built the cars, and if you look closely at the sign there, it says B.S. Cunningham Company, 1402 Elizabeth Avenue, Palm Beach.
Who's in the picture?
I'm in the picture right there. Okay?
Hey.
The next model Cunningham built was known as the C4RK, and the C4R, and it was built much lighter than the previous models. We felt that one of the problems that we had was being overweight, and this car was in line with what the weight should have been. The completed car, less gasoline, was 2,100 pounds, and also that was less the engine. It was about 2,700 pounds with the engine. With a full load of gas, and we carried about 65 gallons, it really got up there. This picture was taken at one of the tracks in the United States. I'm not sure that I can recall just which one. The truck in the background is the Cunningham truck that brought the various parts and so forth, tires, to the track. The bump you see on the hood there is an oil cooler. Obviously, it was an afterthought, but it turned out to be a very good location for an oil cooler. This is a picture of the Cunningham C5R, the car that was built after the C4s. Here we were attempting to streamline the car so that it went through the wind at high speeds with less power or faster with the same power. It turned out to be quite a success in that respect, in that it was faster than the C4 with basically the same engine. The picture here shows the car running at LeMans, and at the time I think John Fitch was driving, and he was my co-driver. The car was very unstable at high speed. It was really a handful. And we subsequently found out that it was due to the fact the car was too streamlined. It was trying to lift off the road. It was shaped like a wing, providing lift. And there wasn't much known in those days about the aerodynamics of cars, even race cars. But as we look back on it, all we needed to do was put a spoiler on the car and a wing on top that would be adjustable for down pressure, and the car would have probably handled fine. Its speed was an amazing 186 compared to the C4s at 155.
What year was this?
This was in 1953, Le Mans. We finished third that year with this car, and we should have won, but that was the year that the disc brakes were first introduced on race cars, and they were so superior, and Le Mans having 4 very slow corners where brakes were very important, it was the brakes that beat us. The Jaguar had the Dunlop disc brakes, and while we would pass them on the straightaway, they'd repass us slowing down for the right angle turn at the end of the straightaway.
Okay.
This picture shows Briggs Cunningham in the driver's seat of the C4, and in the center is John Fitch, the man who co-drove with me in the Sebring 1953, the race we won. And we are apparently having a discussion in the pit area prior to the race. I don't know.
You mean you were dressed in a tie
I was always dressed in a tie in those days,
when you drove?
even when I drove.
Were you, like, viewed as strange for doing that?
I just was trying to do something that established me as Phil Walters.
I see. So nobody else did, mostly.
I don't think so.
Okay.
This picture shows the car at Floyd Bennett Field race in 1954, and I was driving the car. We won the race, and here's a picture after the race of the car where I'm sitting next to my wife. To my left, the first man is Jack Donaldson. To his left is our mechanic, Eddie Bergnon. And to the extreme right is Father Walters, Pop Walters.
In the background behind the sailor?
Right, the last man with the hat.
He's holding a cup.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what's this picture?
Hmm?
Tell me about this picture.
This is a picture of me taken at Floyd Bennett shortly after the race.
And it looks like it appeared in a magazine or something. Okay.
This picture shows the Cunningham C4 at Watkins Glen in 1954. The car won the race, and the story behind it is rather interesting. The car normally had 3 gas tanks. One was in the typical position in the back above the rear axle, and then there were 2 between the chassis and the drive shaft, 1 on each side. The total gallonage was 65 gallons. The car, since it was built primarily for endurance races like Watkins Glen, it had 2 shock absorbers for each wheel, each one doing half the work. In other words, we were guaranteeing that they both kept working because they weren't working hard. Also, the engine was designed with endurance in mind. It had 325 horsepower in the endurance form. We had some special engine equipment, primarily a different camshaft, that increased the power from 325 to 400 horsepower. But the Chrysler people who had been providing us with the various engine goodies said that we should think twice before using this cam because the reliability of the engine would be considerably limited by comparison to the 325 horsepower version. Nevertheless, this was going to be the last race the C4R was going in. It had won many races throughout the United States over a period of 2 seasons. And because the car was becoming obsolete and not particularly competitive with the latest 4.5-liter Ferraris, this was going to be its last race. So to give the car every opportunity possible, we took off the 2 shocks and ran with 1. We eliminated 2 of the 3 gas tanks, and we put in the 400 horsepower camshaft version. The car started about in the middle of the pack, and at the end of the second lap, it was running second to Bill Spear in the latest 4.5-liter Ferrari, which was the car to beat in those days. Bill Spear had driven the C4 on occasion. He co-drove at LeMans in one with Briggs Cunningham, so he knew the capabilities of the C4. So you can imagine how flabbergasted he was when on the long downhill straight I passed him and went on to win the race. Fortunately, shortly after passing him, it started to rain pretty hard, and that perhaps influenced the fact that we finished the race, because in the rain we were driving very softly and not abusing the engine. It was the C4R's last and most glorious race. This is a picture of a 1955 Jaguar in the 1955 Sebring race. The picture shows Walters driving, and he was co-driving with the famous Mike Hawthorne, who drove for Jag in certain important races like this in LeMans, And he also drove Formula One Grand Prix race cars for Ferrari. He was one of the world's top drivers at the time. The reason we were driving this Jaguar was because we had applied to Dunlop for their disc brakes for the Cunninghams, and they rejected the offer to buy on the basis that their good customer, Jaguar, would not appreciate the fact that they were selling their brakes to one of their principal competitors. So we joined them. Briggs decided to take on the Jaguar distributorship, and this is the first Jaguar race that Cunningham sponsored. We won the race, and that was all I could say. We won the race. This picture is taken after winning the Sebring race, and it shows Cunningham with the microphone in hand. To the right of him is Walters, and to the right of Walters is Mike Hawthorne.
And who's behind Briggs? Anybody?
Don't know.
And that was 19 when? 1955?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what's this, Phil?
This picture was taken just after winning the 1953 Sebring race with the C4 Cunningham, C4R. On the left is John Fish. In the middle is an unknown girl, and I am on the right. The girl is holding the cup, and we're all sitting on top of the C4.